How was your weekend, Captain?
It was good.
Good.
I got to see Crystalia and Mike LaNoche.
Mm-hmm.
It's always good to see them.
Very good comedians. I didn't get to go. I was busy with some other things, but I was excited that you had asked me to join you. Sorry that I couldn't. I know that they always put on a good show. The time that I saw them before with you, it was one of those side-splitting, you even cry once or twice because you're laughing so incredibly hard. They put on a fantastic show. So,
well, Mike LaNoche has dick towels that are for sale. And he just came out with the new version, the Magnum dick towel. So those are available for sale now.
Okay.
If anybody's interested.
Right.
If anybody's interested in purchasing one of those.
Right. Well, good thing he got the big ones going.
Yeah. He won't be using one, but
No.
yeah, so that was fun. And then looking forward to part 4. Even though Rabia, she released a lot of the information, they kept on talking about that there was a huge bombshell that was going to be dropped. And so I guess the story goes that somebody got a hold of this. I believe it was like the Sun, the Baltimore Sun or something, got a hold of the information that they're going to be releasing. And it was kind of unaware whether it's going to be on episode 3 or episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there was some pretty big bombshells on episode 3, but then I was told that a lot of that stuff was gone over on Undisclosed. So I didn't listen to every episode of the Undisclosed podcast. So I didn't know some of that. So I thought that was a pretty big bombshell. And so I believe it was Thursday or Friday, Rabia released some of the DNA testing that they then released on episode 4. And I thought episode 4 was pretty powerful. And then I think overall, just looking at the documentary as a whole, it was very good. I mean, it could have been 8 parts. They could have went into a lot more detail, but it was almost a continuation of Serial and a continuation of a lot of the coverage that has already been done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like they had the viewer, almost they started with the idea, we're going to assume that these viewers know a little bit about the case already.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very good. And if you haven't watched it, spoiler alert, but also check it out. I think it was really good.
Yeah, I thought the 4-part series was good. My general thought, though, was it was kind of like reading a book for the second time or watching a movie for the second time almost, because, like you said, most of the stuff you know about it going into it. And so for me, a lot of it was just putting some visuals to stuff I had already read or heard. But
you wouldn't have known about the new information.
Correct. Yeah. I did think it was good. The one thing that I found incredibly interesting that I did not know was the idea that Adnan was eventually offered some kind of deal.
Right.
And
so basically what the deal was that he would plead guilty,
mm-hmm.
and then he'd have to spend another 4 years in prison. Now, you can look at this deal in 2 ways. One, he'd have to admit that he's guilty. It's not an Alfred plea, and that's kind of a whole separate thing, and a lot of people know about that. But you have to say that you're guilty of a crime.
Mm-hmm.
With the Alfred plea, you're basically pleading guilty, but with the idea that you're innocent, but that the state has enough evidence to possibly convict you. And so you're basically admitting to that you're admitting to the fact that they have enough evidence to convict you.
Right.
So this one's different because
this is a straight up guilty.
Yeah, and then he talked about how that would be lying to his, if he said that he did it, then that would mean that he was lying to his family, lying to Sarah Koenig, lying to all these other people, and he didn't want to do that. But I also think it's also tricky too, because at the time of their appeals, they were winning the appeals.
Mm-hmm.
So after you win a couple, do you take your chances? And then after his conviction is then, the conviction was overturned, and then they overturned that on appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So he went from going, well, he's guilty, to, well, now he's innocent until proven guilty. Oh, well, no, he's back to guilty again.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he would change his mind about taking that deal after that conviction came down, because after that appeal was revoked, basically, a new trial, you're looking at maybe 2 to 4 years before anything will happen with this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a weird thing, man, because trying to put myself in his shoes is impossible to do for many reasons. One, he's been in prison for what, almost 20 years?
Well, and his feet are in the shoes.
Well, and so one, I wouldn't know what it's like to be in prison for almost 20 years, but two,
right,
he knows 100% if he's guilty or innocent.
Right.
I still don't know 100% either way. And as someone who has probably questioned his innocence more than I've questioned his guilt, if that makes sense, meaning I lean toward the side of, if I had to divide it up into 100, I would say 52% of me feels like he's guilty. And so therefore it's one of those weird things that I kind of felt like maybe I'm putting too much weight into this, but it almost feels to me like someone who was guilty, I think, would take that deal before someone who was innocent. And him not taking that kind of way out, or easier way out. I mean, I thought it's kind of powerful stuff. Even though it doesn't convince me one way or the other, but it does make me contemplate the whole thing a little differently.
Well, I think personally that if you went into this 4-part series and you looked at it as, 50% guilty, 50% innocent, you should be walking away. I think they showed enough evidence, and you'd really have to go through the detailed reports of the DNA testing that they did. What's kind of a little weird to me is that the testing that they did do, they talk about the defense attorney,
mm-hmm.
how they went over the pieces that they wanted tested and some of the stuff they didn't have tested. And that kind of seems a little fishy to me. Like, why not just have it all tested? But,
mm-hmm.
So if she did scrape somebody, like the fingernail DNA that they had, if she did scratch somebody, it was not Adnan. So there's that, which I think is pretty big. And I think the other thing that was pretty big was that there was no DNA of him found on her. Now we know that Jay claimed that he was wearing gloves,
mm-hmm.
but I would think in the struggle of killing somebody, which the way the cops said it was done was inside her car, probably they're guessing that he used his hands. And if it was done in that manner, in such a small, confined area, if she fought back any, which you would assume that she would,
mm-hmm.
that there would be some kind of DNA of his left on hers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no evidence of that. So I think that's pretty big. And I think when you come out of this, if you're not leaning more, 60-40 that he's innocent, I think it's just not examining the information enough.
Well, and I still stand by the way that I felt before watching the 4-part series, but I also want to throw in there the other way that I feel is, while I lean towards guilt for Adnan, even with just Serial and Undisclosed and anything that has come about since then, including the 4-part series on HBO, I've always kind of felt like this thing should go to trial again. I feel that there's enough reasonable doubt that this thing needs to be examined again and hashed over again.
Well, you basically have no physical evidence, and your whole trial's based off of guy Jay Wilds, which by all of his friends' accounts, he's a liar. So just that alone, when that's all you have, and you can poke holes in the story, and then if you ask Jay Wild, well, what about this or what about that? He'll go, well, the Best Buy scenario, that that was come up by the cops.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the timeline, we know for a fact, was altered because of the cops. So we have a situation where you have a guy, Jay Wilds, liar. On top of that, the cops are making him lie. And that is what convicts somebody. And that is absolutely ridiculous and definitely deserves a fair trial. Even if you think he's 100% guilty, if you told me he doesn't deserve a fair trial, I'd say, you's a moron.
Right.
You know, because, like I said, if there was more to convict him on other than just somebody's story. And then, you know, I thought it was interesting, too, because in part 4, they said, you know, we got a hold of Jay Wilds. And Jay started saying, well, look, what happened was that I think he said it was like 10 pounds to 15 pounds of marijuana that Adnan wanted Jay to get. So Jay got that. And then once he got that amount of weed, Adnan basically said, like, look, I'll turn you in if you don't help me bury this body.
Right.
And I think that's just a loaded bullshit story. I mean, you're going to tell me that you had plans to take his car, because he also says, we planned this. I was going to take his car and take his cell phone, and he was going to call me. So from that time that you had the car and the cell phone, which we have we have knowledge of where you were at that day, you're going to tell me that you got 10 to 15 pounds of marijuana and you have no money anyways, and then somehow that Adnan's going to turn that against you? I mean, the story doesn't make much sense at all. And the fact that it's ever changing. I mean, this new trial should be happening right away.
Well, and one thing that I've always wondered about as far as Jay's involvement goes is it seems to me like if Adnan was planning on killing Heyman Lee, that it would have been easier to chance getting away with it if he would not have involved anybody else.
Right.
And so it always seems weird to me when we have Jay saying, well, not only did he involve me, but to the point where he's threatening things against me if I don't help him. And, you know, so where I've always called that part of the story into question, because I really believe that it would have been easier for Adnan to possibly get away with this if nobody else were involved. But then I have to remind myself, well, if Adnan did do it, he's 17 at the time, and some of the things, some of the actions, some of the plans involved may not make sense to us as adults or us as people that have had time to think about this scenario so much, where he may not have put so much thought into it or good thought into it before this went down.
Well, I think this also proves that, one, where's his motivation? Where's Adnan's motivation? I think they don't do a good job of proving what that motivation is, other than a jealous ex-boyfriend. That's weird. We have a lady coming forward that's came forward multiple times that puts him in a library. So there goes an alibi during the time period that the cops claim that she's being murdered. So that makes zero sense. And then we have the timeline of that day, which we know is fabricated by the police. So then you have to start assuming what else is fabricated by the police. And one of the things that they pointed out was the amount of debris that was on those car tires should not have been there based on the weather, that this car was, you know, the expert basically said, look, if they had to bet, it looked like the car had recently been moved there. Mm-hmm. And we also had a neighbor in that area that said, look, if this car was there for a long time, we would have known. Mm-hmm. And they didn't remember a car being there. So we have that. Then on top of that, one of the things,
not only known, but they state that their general reaction to seeing a car there for more than a week or two would be to call it into the authorities to have it towed away.
Right. And some of the things they're not mentioning is that license plate was run a couple times during the time that they claimed that the car was missing. Well, why would that be run by the cops? Why would that license plate be run by the cops if they didn't see the vehicle somewhere and thought it was suspicious? So They didn't bring that up, and they also didn't bring up the track coach, even though the track coach can't say with 100% certainty that Adnan was there because he didn't take attendance. He said, look, if Adnan wasn't there, it would have threw up red flags. So I think that, but I also think they pointed out a couple really interesting things. One, Seller, the guy that found her, how close his house is to the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Very close. The fact that he has, now here's what's strange though to me. If he took her back to his house, this guy has been known to actually like flash himself, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think he's been arrested on it. So so let's say he gets Hay somehow, brings her back to his house. The validity, when you look at those weird diamond shapes, which are a lot smaller than I thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
But to see these weird diamond shapes, one, I always wondered if that had something to do with she had a bag that held balls in it, like a ball bag, and her trunk. And I always wondered if those diamond shapes came from that, but they looked very solid and not like, now, there would be more of an outline than a solid block shape.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that these investigators, and that was another thing that wasn't clear in the documentary. I think one of the things that they did a bad job was they have two guys that are investigating the case.
Yeah, two private investigators that helped out.
And it just didn't seem that clear because they didn't keep reintroducing what they were finding. And they said, look, here's a piece of equipment that this guy would be known to use. And look, that's a connection. He's the guy that found her. He found her 40 yards away from the road.
Mm-hmm.
This is a far way. Like, why are you going so far into the woods to take a leak? It didn't make a lot of sense. But what also doesn't make a lot of sense, though, is his motivation would be what? Probably sexual. And it looks, based off the DNA, that there wasn't a sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
So was it a sexual assault attempt and he just botched it? And this is the result, a possibility. And then we have Don, where they, go over his alibi. And I don't give a shit about Donnie. Don't give a shit about Donnie. Because I don't give a shit about his alibi. Because one, they say, look, it'd be weird to have two texts at that time. So, look, if your mom is involved, or your mom's girlfriend, or whoever else is involved in your work, to me, your mother or a family member giving you your alibi, to me, is no alibi.
Well, possibly providing. We can't prove that that's how.
Right.
He has that.
But I'm
alibi.
saying that there could be involvement, so I'm going to say no alibi, right? So, fine, no alibi. Or tell me there's an alibi. Tell me that maybe it works out on some level. I will never get over the fact that your girlfriend's missing and you don't try to make contact.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, for a long time I thought, well, it's kind of strange that Adnan never contacted Hay. Contacts her the night before, says, I got a cell phone. Hey, girl, got my cell phone. Got my shitty-ass mustache. Looks like I just drank a bunch of chocolate milk. I'm sorry, but Adnan's mustache in high school was so bad. But anyways, so he calls Hay the night before. I always thought, why didn't Adnan try to contact her, page her, or something? I understand not calling the house, but she has a pager. And now he says, I don't remember if I called her. Well, I think we could find out through the call log if he did or not, like his call log. But let's just assume he never called her. Little fishy.
Right.
Stinks a little bit. But what stinks more? The ex-boyfriend that's friends with her, not contacting her when he's also in contact with all of her friends, and all the friends are updating each other? that's not as fishy as her boyfriend not contacting her, not reaching out once, not going, I might want to just call her pager, see what's up. I mean, look at the Schaefer case. Boy goes missing, girlfriend calls the cell phone almost every day. Right. It's going straight to voicemail. She keeps calling. So, can't pick up the phone, Donnie? I mean, I wish in this docuseries they would have dove into that a little bit more. So that bothered me. So we got the car being moved. I think there's proof of that. I think that's shady. I think the cops made that up. But
we have a quote unquote expert who says, if I had to bet on it, I believe the car was moved.
Right.
We don't know for certain that it was moved.
Right. But if you look at that picture and you see all that debris on those tires, and then you look at the other vehicles around it without the debris on the tires, you just go, what? This doesn't line up. Something's wrong here. So again, gut feeling is it's moved. But I think the biggest thing for me, I mean, again, this 10-pound of weed story makes zero sense. And this is another just Jay Wilds is bullshit. That dude is bullshit. And all the crimes that, he's probably ratted on everybody. So I just want to end my thoughts on a couple things. Well, a couple more things I want to go over. The fingerprint on the rear view mirror. Mm-hmm. I think that is huge. Now, if we had some DNA, and we do have DNA, but what I'm saying is if we had some DNA code and that I could get DNA from Sellers or I can get DNA from Donnie, I'm testing the DNA myself. I am finding the match. I am going to trial. I am screaming at the rooftops. Guess what? We got a DNA match and we found it. And this is who it is. Mm-hmm. That's what I would be trying to do. I'd be going complete offensive here. And you have to do something that shakes up the system so much to say, we figured this out because you were too lazy to fucking do it. So I think that's one. But then the other thing is that we have that fingerprint. Now, I know it's a lot easier to follow somebody around and wait for them to drop a cup or put out a cigarette or whatever. But that fingerprint, I think, matters because if that's Sellers' fingerprint, then Sellers guilty.
Right.
Lock him up. If that's Donnie's fingerprint, now I think you can argue that away a little bit. But it doesn't match Adnan and it doesn't match Jay.
Well, and the reason why you could possibly explain it away if it were Donnie's is that Sellers has no conceivable reason to have been in her vehicle at any time ever. Right. So where you have Donnie, where someone could present the argument, yeah, I drove her car once, or I was in the car multiple times for this reason or that reason. The thing that I think is tricky here with the DNA and with the fingerprints, and I think they could have been, well, I know they could have been, but furthermore, I think they should have been a little more clear during that conversation, because when you watch that part, it's not so much like them listing hardcore facts for you. It's three guys having a conversation and you're listening in on it and they're like, okay, well, there's a fingerprint and then there's this DNA. And basically they're going through and saying, okay, well, the DNA doesn't match anybody in the system. Well, the fingerprint doesn't match anybody in the system. The tricky thing with that fingerprint in regards to, is it Seller or Sellers? Sorry.
I think it's Sellers.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure on that. But
the tricky thing in regards to it, possibly the fingerprint possibly belonging to Sellers, is when they say the fingerprint's not found in the system, I have to believe that his fingerprints are probably in that system, because we know he's been convicted of offenses before, and typically that would be standard protocol.
I think they explain that away somehow.
That his fingerprints are not in the system?
Yeah.
The way that I took it is they were kind of guessing as to whose DNA and fingerprints would be in the system or not.
Right.
It wasn't like somebody saying, well, I looked up this individual and his fingerprints are in the system.
Well, what they did tell us was that they went back and had the cops clear all the cops, basically to say, well, we know that fingerprint is not any of the cops or detectives that worked that case.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that, but I want to say that there was a reason that Sellers' fingerprints wouldn't be in the system. They know Don's isn't, for sure,
Well, they don't know that his are not. They just say we don't believe his fingerprints. See, that's what I'm saying is that's where that conversation was one of the most interesting conversations I thought throughout the whole 4-part series.
Yeah, and it's a little gray.
I think they should have not just been clearer. I think they should have figured out who is in the system and who is not. And that could have really helped some things along there. Because even with Adnan's, like when you say that the DNA doesn't match Adnan's, there's a good chance that Adnan's DNA is in that system because of what he was later convicted of. So I really question. I think that Sellers' fingerprints would be in the system if I'm going to sound like the guy that the grass expert, let's call him that, the grass expert that they spoke to.
Right.
I'm going to say that if I have to place a wager on it, I would go to the side of betting that Sellers' fingerprints are in the system.
Yeah, and it could, look, who knows what was edited out. I still believe that they had a reason that there was, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's almost like, here's our reason why we don't think he's in the system. I don't know if it was a time period or what, but but yeah, I think to me it's going, hey, let's connect the DNA, and also just the amount of stuff that was left at the scene. Like, it was kind of weird because if you looked at like the test that they did, some of the stuff, like, instantly, like, you go, what?
You mean the burial site? Yeah,
but like, what's kind of convoluted about all that stuff is you look at it on the roadside and you go, oh, well, on the roadside they found a rolled up condom. And you go, oh, well, shit, that must be something. But then you start figuring out that I believe that condom was roughly about 140 yards away.
Mm-hmm. So
pretty far. But we're talking inches away from the body were those ropes.
Right.
And one of the things they didn't get clear on, and his lawyer stated, well, on one of those ropes or wires or whatever you want to call it, there was some DNA that didn't match Adnan.
Mm-hmm.
But what they didn't tell you, ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Ready for this shit? Unknown female. What?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is if it had something to do,
which we don't know that it even had anything to do with the murder
and
or Heyman Lee or anything connected to the case.
Right. It could be from anybody, really.
Mm-hmm.
It could be from a little kid just playing around, dropped it. But it's kind of suspicious to me. But also, why would you drop this other stuff if you used a cord or whatever for the strangulation? Why would you leave this stuff by the body?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, if you're a 17-year-old and you did it, maybe you would. Or maybe if you weren't experienced, you were just a known, I'll show you mine, and then you run and call the cops on me. If you're that kind of dude, that maybe you're not equipped to get rid of the body, you're not equipped to get rid of the evidence. But again, we don't know if that's involved or not. But I want to bring up something that I noticed on the last episode 3. And I don't want to bring it up because I don't think it's fair to just like toss in like a theory. But when you have this piece of evidence, possibly something that has nothing to do with the case, I thought it was really strange that when you watch Jay Wilde's trial and when they actually sentence him, that there was nobody on his side. There's nobody there to watch him get sentenced. except for one person. And that person was Stephanie, his girlfriend at the time. So I found that odd, but I don't believe she was his girlfriend at the time of his sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand. One, I don't understand somebody that beautiful dating somebody so personally ugly and physically ugly as Jay Wilds. But you know, you're friends, or you're in circles with Adnan, you're in circles with Heyman Lee. This Jay Wilds is 19. He's a little bit of an outsider. He's also a known drug dealer, if you want to call him that. And I don't understand why she was there. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe they were still dating. And if they were still dating, of course she's there for that. But it's just kind of odd to me that she was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, you know, and then the other thing too, that which just popped up into my brain, is you have a guy that worked with Donnie. Back to Donnie. But you have a guy that worked with Donnie that says, look, he had scrape marks on his arms. And to me that encapsulates the whole thing. We have a missing girl. She's missing for 3 weeks. We find her. We have a decent lead, but these detectives were notorious for taking witnesses, threatening them, pushing them to testify. I think that's what happened here. We have cops that changed the story. We have evidence that wasn't checked. We have suspects that weren't checked. It's like they had a direct line to Adnan. They pursued that, and they didn't pursue anything else. Mm-hmm. And that becomes very difficult, because if it's somebody's freedom that's on the line, you can't go back and reinvestigate 20 years ago. You can't go back to see if Donnie had scrapes on his arms. But I'll bet you this. I bet money people were watching this that are involved, and they're sweating bullets because their day is coming. And I think what's going to happen, my gut feeling, and I've never really gone, innocent or guilty. I don't like talking about that. Kind of like you, it's the idea of this guy deserves a free trial. Mm-hmm. Or a new trial, free trial.
Free trial.
He deserves a new trial.
Here's your free trial, and here's the one you have to pay for.
You have to pay.
Buy one, get one free trial.
But I also think it's telling, and I agree with you. I mean, I think it's telling, hey, if I'm guilty and I did this, I have to admit to it and I get out in 4 years.
That's such a weird thing, though, man, because
taking it.
Yeah, that's the route that I think that most people would go if they're guilty. Because, and then think about this too. You probably have, we've seen this with other cases. I don't know this to be true with this case, but I believe it's probably occurred. We've seen in other cases where there's an individual behind bars for a very long time. And when, in regards to Adnan, you're talking about half his life, where family members have come to that person and said, look, even if you didn't do it, just take the deal, man. We will understand. Everybody will understand. We all have your back. You should just take the deal and let's be done with this. Let's move on.
Right, but what's great is his mother is a woman of principle.
Mm-hmm. And I like his family. Like, that was one thing that was neat about the 4-part series, was getting to see and feeling like you're getting to know his family. And I think his brother's name is, don't slap me if I get this wrong, but I think his brother's name is Yusuf.
I believe so. Yeah.
And I tell you what, I like the cut of his jib. That the way that Yusuf talks about his brother and the way that he cares for his parents and seems to look after them, that should be a textbook for all of us out there as our parents get older, to take care of them.
Well, yeah, I applaud his brother, and I obviously applaud his cousin, Robbie. I applaud his mother. And then I feel really bad. I do feel bad for them, but I feel awful for his dad, because this has just wrecked somebody. And when everybody sits there and screams, the real victim is Hay. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. That's the real victim. But if this guy has done 20 years for something he didn't do, he's also a victim, and his family is a victim. And guess what? Hay is still a victim because there's nobody that we don't have the right person. And so she's still a victim, and her family's still a victim. And the problem with some of these family members is they go, well, we think that they got the right guy. Well, you don't know. And have you looked at the freaking evidence? Because if I'm looking at this evidence and somebody murdered my daughter even, I'd go, I'm looking at this evidence. I'm going, I don't know if this is the right guy. And we offered him a deal, and he won't even take the deal to get out of jail in 4 years. I would be pushing not so much to keep him in jail, but pushing for them to do reinvestigate it. Keep him in jail and reinvestigate it. Like, let's get to the bottom of this. And I think this, it's slimy to me that you're going to take on a case and also run for office at the same time, the DA. It's slimy. And I also think this deal, because Adnan's attorney sits there and says, well, man, 4 years, that's weird. I wonder if his term's up. And then he goes, nah, it probably doesn't have anything to do with that because it's so messed up if it does. But guess what? It probably does. Because that's how bad these people are. That's how corrupt these people are. And, to me, it just makes, this is not the America I want to live in. I'm proud of our country. I'm proud of all these things. But, this ain't right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at this evidence and just go, hey, we need to dive into this more. Have a new trial. Have a free trial.
Mm-hmm.
Or have a trial that you charge him for. I don't know. It's just there's a lot of victims in here, especially if he is not guilty. And I just think the more evidence yes, it's 20 years, but the more and more evidence that they overturn, every stone that they don't leave unturned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps coming up, pointing the finger in another direction. And if the information that they were coming up with half the time pointed to a new direction or back to him, I'd say, hey, I'll just leave him in there. But still all they have after 20 years is a guy's confession to help. He wasn't a witness to the murder. All his confession is that he helped bury the body.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other stuff he's telling you that the cops fabricated. And then on top of that, he says, well, it's because, how much is a pound of weed? Do you know? You know what I mean? Like $1,000?
I wouldn't even know.
So what,
If you asked me 20 years ago, I might have might have an idea.
Yeah. His nickname was Smokey.
I don't require a pound of weed anymore.
Yeah. A day. No, so let's just say it's $1,000 roughly, but you think like a known liar, right? Not saying like he's malicious or anything, but his friends are like, yeah, Jay's a bullshitter. A drug dealer is not going to give a bullshitter 10 pounds of weed. And I'd also think that it'd be pretty hard to find 10 pounds of weed within a few hours. So I don't know. This all stinks. This case is as bad as Adnan's high school mustache.
Well, the problem, amongst other problems, is Jay is just not believable in any form at all, and he is the thing is. The problem too, and this is, I say it as the problem, but it's the truth of the matter, is that Jay he only needs to be convincing on one day, and that's the day of Adnan's trial.
Right.
And he only has to convince some of the people in that room. And so really when we're talking about Well, they need to continue the investigation. There is no investigation. There might be private citizens, and that's what they are, be it lawyers, investigators, family members, whomever. The only investigation you have going on is conducted by citizens. Law enforcement's not going to reinvestigate this because it already went to trial. There's already a conviction. There's already someone sitting behind bars. The case is closed as far as they're concerned. So the only movement you have a chance at getting is something happening within the court system itself.
Right.
And until he is cleared of the murder or can't be convicted of it, then they're not going to investigate anything further.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is you have Jay's ever-changing, slightly changing stories that have changed since the trial date, but that doesn't even factor into the equation anymore because, again, he only has to be convincing on that day and to those people in that room.
Well, and here's the other thing is I feel bad. Let's assume that Jay Wilds is telling the truth. He could, like I was telling Morgan last night, he could be lying about 1,000 things. But if he's telling the truth about one thing, that he helped bury that body,
mm-hmm.
or that he saw her body in the trunk, then that's all he has to be telling the truth of. And he's kind of came out and said, look, I don't care what you think about what's true or not. It doesn't change the fact of what I saw in that car.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's true, then what I feel bad about was he got in a situation where the cops forced him to alter his story. And then, of course, he's not going to sound believable because he's constantly changing his story.
Mm-hmm.
And he was forced to. But in that first trial, the only thing you have going for you, if you're the DA, is that we have a guy confessing to the burial. But if the defense was on their game and knew their shit, they could have proved that this story was doctored by law enforcement. And these stories should not be doctored by law enforcement. We've seen it in West Memphis 3. It's absolutely ridiculous. And these law enforcement officers should know better. And it should be about finding the truth. But
well, it's not that they should know better. They do know better.
Right.
We know
that's why they're doing it.
We know that. But the other thing, though, we have to factor in, and this is one thing that I do have a bit of an issue with as far as the general public's perception of these types of cases and these types of stories where you have someone that there's clearly reason to question if they're guilty or not. But you have to keep in mind, and I don't mean these investigators and these detectives in Adnan's case specifically.
Right.
I'm talking in general here. One thing that we need to keep in mind is these individuals are used to being lied to constantly. And sometimes they have to try to find their way to the truth. And sorry, we're not always going to like the way that they get to it. I don't agree with the way that they believe they got to it in this situation or a lot of other situations. But most of us are not in a line of work where we're used to being constantly lied to. And over years and years and years of being subjected to that, it can change you. And I'm not saying that that's in defense of these individuals, but I think we should keep that in mind when we review these types of stories before we're so quick to crucify people for things that we don't really understand.
No, yeah, I agree with you on some level, but here's a situation where because of a couple cop errors and a couple, writing down wrong locations that we have a story changing 4 times. And I think at that point, once his story is not lining up with any evidence, I think at some point you got to go, hey, we got to put this on hold for a second. We need to do a little more digging. And it's, but it's sad though, because there's a lot of victims in this. If Jay's telling the truth, he's a victim. his life has been completely altered, and I'm sure before Serial, his life was a little more normal. I'm sure Donnie is the same way, right? You know, because if Donnie had nothing to do with it, it's all over the place. All Heyman's friends, Heyman's family, Adnan's family. I mean, it's sad. But I think it's sad because I think the justice system here failed. And the other thing that was so depressing to watch was when they were watching the voting for the new district attorney.
Oh, yeah.
And to know that one said, hey, I don't think he's guilty. I don't think there's enough evidence. And basically, I get in, I'm letting the guy go. You can retry him if you want. That's what one of them said. The other one said that he would mandate a new investigation. And then the other person said that they never made a comment on the case before and wouldn't say either way. And you're sitting there going, 2 of the 3 is a home run for you. And it's the third one that gets voted in.
What was it though? I thought the person that got voted in never commented on the case.
No, that's what I'm saying is that 2 of the 3 are either going to let him go free or reopen the case. And that's 2 things you want.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that won is the one that never commented on the case. And that's the one who won. So can you imagine his family watching the votes come in and how disappointed they probably were?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%.
That's what I mean. I mean, like, you're going, look, at 2 of the 3 wins, we're at least getting some help. But then the one that never made a comment on it wins. I'd be like, oh, just what the shit luck that is. But and it's sad to hear about his mom, and hopefully she's doing okay with that. I don't know the situation enough to comment other than that was really sad to hear.
Right. It sounded like it was stage 1 leukemia, and so there should be a fighting chance there. So of course, wishing her all of the best of luck and the families as well. But yeah, tricky situation. We have an individual that may or may not be guilty. The trial wasn't great to begin with, and it seems like very tough to try to get this to go before a judge again.
Yeah, and yeah.
I think they could have, as far as, let's just go back to the show and talk about the show rather than the case. I think that they could have done better with the private investigators. I know you mentioned that. And part of me wonders what that is. Like, I bet you what probably happened was because those guys seemed pretty good. Like, I liked where they were going with the kind of outside of the box thinking on a few things.
Right.
I'm guessing the reason why they weren't part of the show more is, one, they have so much stuff that they got to cram into just a 4-part series. Mm. But then 2, you probably have a situation where these individuals, the private investigators, are given a list of names of people to talk to. And I'm guessing that a lot of those people on that list didn't talk to them.
Right.
And so we probably have a scenario where these guys are going, yeah, we've done a lot of work on it, but we don't have any information for you because so-and-so won't talk and this person won't return our calls and so on and so forth. And so I think that I would love to see a show where it is more of, you have to do the show the way they did the show, but I think you could have a whole second show where it would be somebody like a group of private investigators that are coming up with these different ideas. And even if there's doors being slammed in their faces as they're asking questions, I think you could see that process and the possibility of who that could point to.
Right.
It would be very interesting to see something we've talked about on this show before, where you have a list of suspects and you go, okay, well, maybe we can't circle the guy that did it. Maybe we can't circle the name of the individual that did it, but maybe we can cross a few of these people off of our list. And, Don being one of them, Jay being one, because I really question Jay as well.
Yeah.
Because we've seen many, many times where someone who is guilty of much, much more will admit to a few things while they're sitting on the hot seat.
Right.
Just to get you to believe the rest of the bullshit sandwich that they're now going to feed you.
Right. And just because the fingerprint on the mirror doesn't match Jay, that doesn't mean anything. That does not rule him out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing is, one thing that I would, again, wager never happened is they're now looking at this fingerprint and going, okay, well, who can we compare it to? Who can we cross off of the list? There would have been a different list when she was missing or shortly after her body was found,
right,
of people to check, because that fingerprint may not belong to the killer.
True.
It could just be some individual that was never questioned, never asked about the case. It could belong to one of her relatives.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting, I think, with a lot of cases is that the universe does its work sometimes and puts pieces down for law enforcement to collect them to get the right person. Mm-hmm. And I think for whatever reason, we have these items that just weren't tested and not followed up with. And that's just a shame. I mean, yes, you have this confession, and I get your point that these cops are lied to a bunch. So even though he is lying, you have to believe the one thing. And that points to Adnan's guilt. And if you have to believe that, you go down that rabbit hole. But you have things that you can test. Mm-hmm. And if you know that she clawed at somebody, where's the marks on Adnan's body? Well, if you can't find them...
But again, we don't know that she clawed at someone. All we know is that there was DNA underneath her fingernails.
Right.
There's no one saying that was skin or blood.
Yeah, I think that's the gray area of some of this testing, which I understand why the defense is doing that, but there's a part of me that would just go, look, it's 20 years. We don't have forever. He's 38 years old. Mm-hmm. We don't have forever. We need to go full offense. And if I was Rabia, if I was anybody that was an Adnan supporter, like the people that believe he's innocent, I would go completely offensive and I would do everything I can. And I wouldn't even care so much even because I think they're doing a good job. Put it on HBO. Get the public behind this so much that it causes the higher ups to do something. And I think they have that power because I think they have enough people that believe in him. But now you have to prove it. And I know that's not how it should be because it should be innocent until proven guilty. But once you're locked up, it's guilty until proven innocent. Well, yeah. So I think they need to go full offensive, and I would do that. I'd spend the next couple of years doing that, and that would be it. Mm-hmm. I'd give it the biggest run for our money for the next 2 years. And I think they can match some of that DNA with people. And I think they can figure out. I think they can. If it's not Adnan, it's almost like the burden is for them to prove who it actually was, and I hope they continue to try.
Well, the thing though too that I try to keep in mind, especially when we're going off of Jay's story, and then knowing that the detectives helped write that story a little bit, is
not a little bit.
There's a chance.
A lot.
There's a chance that, well, we're assuming.
Wait, no. What do you mean we're assuming? In part 3, it's pretty clear that when a cop writes down the wrong location of the ping, mm-hmm. and then they have to call back in the witness to get him to change the story because they wrote it down wrong, mm-hmm. and they have to correct that location, that's not pretty much. That's definitely rewriting the story.
Okay. But the thing is, the only story that matters is the story that's presented in court, the time that he's found guilty. And so however they arrived at that story.
Right, but it's, okay.
What I'm saying is, going off of the thought that Jay is not super reliable, and knowing that likely the detectives helped to write some of that story. There's a chance, though, that they got the right guy, but their story's incorrect.
Yes, I mean that is possible, but I think if the defense simply proved that the story was fabricated by law enforcement, that would give you enough reasonable doubt, and that's what should have happened if she did her work, and also just the fact that incoming calls are unreliable, and just that fact alone, you can't believe that story is correct. That the cell phone ping technology is not scientific fact to back up this liar's story, and that would give you enough reasonable doubt that would get him out of jail, and that would have proven that law enforcement should have did their goddamn work and followed every, connect the dots, not just take this liar's story and start fabricating the truth. And I understand they have a lot of cases that they have to cover. And most of the time, they're doing the best they can. And they're also getting pressure from the family and the community to get something solved and make the streets safer. I get that. But in this case, there should have been enough where somebody stepped back and said, look, this guy's hard to believe. We need to look into this a little more. They'll always have the tape confession and because he has to sign it every time he does it. They would have had that in their back pocket. Mm-hmm. And they could have just done a couple more steps. And I think if they would have done that, I think, again, that would have led them either towards Adnan or away from him. And I just think it's sad that they didn't get to do that.
Well, and you know what? As much as we believe that we're at the mercy of the court and the court system and at the mercy of law enforcement, we're also very much at the mercy, maybe even more so, at the mercy of our own defense. And
what do you mean by that?
Our defense, whatever defense counsel you hire,
right,
to try to get you to try to get the outcome to be what it actually is supposed to be.
Right, and that's where with the system, a lot of people say, well, the system favors, depending on race, but I don't even think it's that. I think it's more dependent on class, because if you're rich, you can hire. I mean, look at OJ, a mountain of evidence, a mountain of DNA. You hire the right people. So it's kind of sad, though, because everybody is entitled, no matter how big your pocketbook, everybody's entitled to a proper defense. And here's a case where they hired one of the best. They just didn't know that she wasn't up to her best because of health issues.
Right. And that's what's so wild here. The thing that, I noticed right away is it's like, we went out of our way to hire somebody based off of record and reputation.
Yeah.
However, we didn't know the extenuating circumstances that where we are hiring and paying for a top rate A+ 5-star defense attorney. What we're actually getting is a shell of that once great attorney.
Right.
And so, I mean, and that's the thing that I point out too, that I try to remind individuals of when this case is brought up and I'm asked questions about this, about all the wrongdoings of, whomever. I try to remind them it's also on the defense to argue that, and it's on the defense to make a case for their client. And unfortunately, that it didn't happen in this situation.
No, I mean, when you have a possible alibi and you don't return the call, that's just dropping the ball. And again, I feel bad on some level, because obviously she's not in her best health. But at the end of the day, I think it was a good docuseries. I'd rate it 4.5 bottle caps out of 5. And it was fun to dive into watching the episode and then the next day discussing it with you, because that's kind of old school True Crime Garage. That's what we did before we even had a show.
Well, and you know what I think is neat about it too is that I would say you don't have to have listened to Serial to watch the docuseries.
Right.
And I would also say that it doesn't matter if you haven't listened to Serial yet and you've already started watching the docuseries. I don't think it matters the order in which you do both of those. So if you're someone out there that hasn't done both, don't stop yourself. You can listen to Serial later. You can listen to it now and watch the show later. They go hand in hand.
Listen to me now and hear me later.